You're listening to School Counseling Simplified, a podcast with easy-to-implement strategies for busy school counselors. Here's your host, Rachel Davis from Bright Futures Counseling.
One thing counselors always ask me is how the heck are they supposed to squeeze it all in? Between individual sessions, planning small groups, class lessons, parent meetings, duty, non-counselor tasks, prepping and planning for sessions, all the things. It can be overwhelming, but I've figured out a way that you can streamline your daily schedule so you can impact more students and get the recognition you deserve. Now you may be thinking, that sounds kind of familiar. Well, that's because it's Module 1 of my Stress-Free School Counseling course. Now, of course, you can join my Stress-Free School Counseling course at any time, but I'm doing a very special promo during July. I am giving all of my Impact members access to Stress-Free School Counseling for absolutely free. We're going to work through the course together, almost like a book club. That way we can get prepared and feel excited and invigorated for back to school season. Now, you may be thinking, well, wait, I'm not an Impact member. No worries. I would love for you to totally join us. If you join Impact during the month of July, you get access to Stress-Free School Counseling for absolutely free. But again, this offer is only valid during the month of July. For $29 a month, you get access to Impact, which includes all of my counseling resources. Yep, every single one, plus PD and an engaged community. And if you join in July, you're getting SFSC too. Awesome, guys. I hope to see you inside Impact so we can work on Stress-Free School Counseling. To get all the details and sign up, go to stressfreeschoolcounseling.com/July. Thanks for listening to another episode of School Counseling Simplified. In today's episode, I interview Leslie. Now, Leslie is in her second year of school counseling at a small private school, and she shares with us what a day in the life is like for her as a school counselor. It's extra unique because Leslie is also a part-time Spanish teacher at her school site and has experience as an adult outpatient therapist as well. I think you're going to love this episode with Leslie. Hey, Leslie, how's it going?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing well. I'm so excited to talk to you today. I just love interviewing counselors from all different backgrounds. Some people are brand new. Some people have been doing it for a while, different grade levels, different parts of the country, all over, because it's just so cool. And I think the listeners love these episodes specifically because they can, really relate to the counselors. So I'm excited to get to know you better. Tell us who you are and a little bit about you.
Sure. I am Leslie Jones, and I am a second-year school counselor. But in a previous life, I used to be an adult outpatient therapist, and I work at a small private school in Mississippi.
Awesome. So I love that. I love when counselors come from different backgrounds. I say that all the time, but it's so true. Usually it's like, oh, I was a teacher, now I'm a counselor, but you were an adult outpatient therapist, you said?
Uh-huh.
Very cool. I used to work at a nonprofit with adults with developmental disabilities, and that has prepared me in so many ways for working with the kids that I never saw coming. So I'm sure, and I'll ask you about that a little more in a bit, but I'm sure your previous experiences help you be a better counselor.
Yes, absolutely. I can kind of see kind of their future if we don't intervene, kind of when I have them now, for sure.
Definitely. So you were a teacher before and a Spanish teacher, is that right?
I am. Yes, I've been the Spanish teacher at the same school where I'm school counselor now. I have been the part-time Spanish teacher this is my 5th year. And before I was the school counselor, my first year was last year. Before that, I was the essentially like the Title I tutor.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was part-time tutor, part-time Spanish teacher, and now I'm part-time Spanish teacher, part-time school counselor.
Okay. Wow. I didn't realize you were still doing both. So that's crazy. Those are two very different hats. So I'd like to know, well, then I'll ask you this way, because I was going to ask, how does your teaching background help you as a counselor, which I still want to ask, but then I want to know if there's any resistance or anything that makes it a little more tricky.
I would say that it was easy to build relationships with students because they had already known me as their Spanish teacher. And because it's a small private school, and I teach pre-K through 8th grade, I'm their Spanish teacher every year. So they had already known me for several years before I became their school counselor. And so it was certainly easier to build rapport, build relationships, or just to, I never felt like I was coming up to a student cold if I had a concern or saw something in their eyes. If I know the kids well enough to kind of, I would hope, be preventative, or I can tell when a kid's having a bad day because I know what they're normally like because I've known them for so many years.
Right. Yes, definitely. And I'm sure that classroom management or just leading a class piece helps during your class lessons.
Yes, although it sometimes backfires for our it's hard, I will say, for the few kids for whom it's hard for them to behave, or they have low intrinsic motivation, or whatever. Or when I'm harder on them as their Spanish teacher, for them it can be a little hard for me to get through, but it hasn't been too big of a hurdle for us to get through yet. Hopefully it never will.
Yes, yes. And then what about being an adult outpatient therapist? How has that background helped you as a school counselor?
The funny thing is that even though I was adult outpatient, I did see some high schoolers, some court mandated high school students who had either been convicted as adults for petty crime, or high schoolers who the children's therapists were just kind of flooded with so many new cases that they needed to bump off their caseload. Some 16-year-olds, some 17-year-olds. So it wasn't, I mean, not that a 16 and 17-year-old is the same as a middle schooler, of course, but that age group wasn't totally foreign to me. Young people wasn't totally foreign to me. And I was the youth counselor at the Catholic Church, my local Catholic church, for 3 or 4 years. I can't remember how many years I did that. And that's actually how I got the Spanish teaching job, through the Catholic school I work at now. And so I was actually familiar with some of the middle schoolers going into the teaching job, and had experience with young people, both as an adult outpatient therapist and as a youth minister.
Okay, very cool. Yeah, so it sounds like you're just bringing a variety of experiences to the role. But even with those backgrounds, every day is different, right? Like every day is.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, different as a counselor. But I want to know, what does, like, if you had to do a typical day in the life for Leslie as a counselor, what would that look like?
Let's take a typical Thursday, since today is a Thursday. A typical Thursday might look like I have Spanish instruction with like pre-K, then a middle school class, and then I might have a couple individual sessions with students, and then and later in the day I'll teach Spanish, another class or two of Spanish, with a planning period thrown in there. So my average is about two students a day for individual sessions. I see each class for whole group counseling once a month. I'm not really doing too many small groups. It's either individual or once a month whole group counseling for everybody, every teacher's class, just because that was the easiest way to kind of manage the workload.
Right. I can't imagine switching between those two hats, doing like a preschool Spanish lesson and then like an upper elementary individual session or something. That's just got to be wild, flipping back and forth.
But again, it kind of serves me tremendously, because I kind of knew who this kid used to be before some incident happened later in this kid's life. So while it's an adjustment for me, it ends up, I have so much background history on a student when something happens and they need to see me as a school counselor, and in that role, for individual counseling. And so it hasn't been too bad. I've gotten used to it. I would say it's definitely very normal for me to jump developmental stages like that.
Right. No, I love that. And that's so true. And it's such a good point about how important the relationships are. And, I love it when I see a counselor who's been at the same school for a while, because they can see the kids, kind of grow up, or like you said, you knew the kid before you saw them in that context necessarily. So that's always helpful. And then it sounds like you were involved, in like a community aspect as well through the church. So that's helpful too. When you're supporting the community, the kids might recognize you from somewhere else. I used to live really far from my school. At the Costa Rica school, I lived close. I would see families all the time. But at the school in California, I lived far. So it was kind of a bummer because I never had those small run-ins, like the grocery store or whatever. Sometimes, obviously, you don't want to have them. But it is.
Yes.
Yeah, but sometimes it's nice for them to be like, oh, that's my counselor. She's in my community, and the families better, things like that.
Right. Yes. Yeah. It's a very small town here. And so everybody seems to know everybody else. And so even I've sometimes, grandparent or a parent will come up to me in the, like, let's say the store, and they'll know who I am because my picture's on social media from the school, and I have no idea who's talking to me right now. I have, they know me, but I don't know who they are
Right.
until they mention their grandson's name or their child's name.
That's funny. Local celebrity.
Well, maybe not that far, but
So tell me, what do you love about school counseling?
When a student genuinely communicates to you that you provided something for them that didn't even realize they were missing. I've definitely had a few scenarios where a student either was resistant to come to school counseling, but they had been referred, or I kind of pulled them into it and suggested it, and maybe they were hesitant, but months later, they're hugging and thanking me and for being there for them, for to get them through a tough time. And that validation, and even when I've had to give some tough love to a student, and when they thank you for it at the down the road, it has been, that's the fuel for the mundane or the paperwork that maybe is not so fun to do. That's definitely has been the special part of doing the work. Mm-hmm.
I love that. I love that you said it's the fuel for doing the mundane things, because those other tasks do exist, right? But it's so nice to have the balance and to realize, like, always come back to your why, right? That's what I'm always reminded
Right.
of.
Right.
So this month, this will air in July, and during July, I'm focusing on schedule hacks to make counselors' lives easier, because so often when I say, what's the hardest part of your job or what's challenging about your job, a lot of people say scheduling. So tell me about, two-part question. First, tell me what do you find challenging about your job? And then maybe it's not scheduling, but maybe it is. And then I want to chat a little bit about scheduling with you as well. But first, what can be challenging about being a school counselor?
I guess I will say is, and I'm going to borrow a term that is coming from a parent, that sometimes the student feels exposed, or the family of the student that I'm seeing feels exposed because they know that their child's talking about personal things. And so sometimes when I make myself vulnerable or connect with a student and share something personal with them, I feel exposed as well. So that has been a challenge, but it bears fruit. I haven't had it not bear fruit where I didn't, where I shared something personal with a student and connected with them in a way, in that way where it didn't bear fruit. But it is kind of scary for sure to put yourself out there. As far as scheduling, I will say that, again, this is only my second year and I've already tweaked so many things. But the biggest feedback I got from students, especially my middle school students, and I'm sure other school counselors can relate to this. Typically, elementary students love to see you and they love the attention, but middle school students are a little more like they're embarrassed that you're pulling them, and they don't want other people to know that they're coming to see you. They may want to come see you, but they don't want other people to know that they're coming to see you. And so that was the biggest feedback I got from them. And so scheduling was hard because I couldn't always give them, the older ones, a heads up that, hey, I could see you tomorrow at 11. Sometimes I would just show up to their class to pick them up. And so I did do the Google online, take an appointment, kind of like Calendly works. And that seems to work okay for the students that have the executive. You have to have intrinsic motivation and executive function skills to do that, which not all middle schoolers have. So that works well for more high functioning students. For other students, it's just has not been something that they really utilize.
That's such a good point. I love that you're using.
And I would say,
oh, go ahead.
Go ahead. And I've experimented with middle school and then dipped into fifth grade, and I then even dipped even further into fourth grade. And I did have some fourth and fifth graders who very quickly picked up on the online system to take appointments for individual sessions, and some who didn't. They just because when it works with one grade level, I'm like, well, how young can I go? Because there's always those few little gems that are just mature beyond their years,
For sure.
and in every class, and I've been pleasantly surprised. Some of these kids have blown me out of the water just with how much they've grown and how independent they are.
Yes. I'm so
So
glad
that has helped tremendously.
that you're experimenting with some of the technology. That's exciting. And like you said, just try it, and it depends on your student population. It depends on the grade level. Some kids it'll work for, some kids it won't. But even if half of your workload is reduced in terms of scheduling, even if only half the kids are capable of doing it, at least it's like a little relief, And that's such a good point about the middle schoolers. Two things came to mind. One, just having for kids who are like embarrassed to come see you, by providing like a consistent meeting time, okay, the same time every week, then they can kind of prepare for it, And then
right.
same time, I for the little guys, I would go to their classroom and pick them up. But for the older kids, even upper elementary, sometimes I would just like have them come to me, like they would be accountable, like we write it in their calendar or whatever. Or sometimes I would call the classroom and be like, hey, can you send so and so? And it was just a little more discreet, I guess. So that's an option too for some kids who are feeling resistant. But yeah, that middle school age, they're always like, don't want to be any different than everyone else,
Right. We because of safety concerns, certainly the way the world is going, they are not allowed to walk to me independently, even the middle schoolers. And they're always supposed to walk around campus in pairs. And so if somebody comes with a peer, that peer would then have to walk back themselves, and so that wouldn't work. And unfortunately, my school counseling room is as far away from the middle school as it could be. Though I have to go physically pick them up. I can meet them halfway on the interior part of the building. So like if we went through the cafeteria, I can meet them in the cafeteria, but there'd still be a portion where they have to walk with me across blacktop.
Gotcha. Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
I didn't even consider logistics like that. Yeah. So it'll vary from school to school, but play around with the options. The main goal is we're trying to see the kids, right? So it's like reducing as many as we can. So I love that.
And the middle school teachers at my school have been phenomenal in kind of making it a safe space, destigmatizing, needing to talk. They have been such great allies for sure. I'm very blessed to be with the staff that I work with.
Yes, that is so great. And yeah, that's another thing. If, if that is a concern, let's get ahead of it preventatively. Like you said, destigmatizing it. That's a great idea.
Mm-hmm.
So
one of the other things I did is I printed out every teacher's schedule and I've stuck that in a binder. And so on the fly, if somebody cancels on me or somebody's absent that I had scheduled, I can very quickly look on my log to see who I haven't seen in a while of my individual students and look at the teacher schedule to see where that class is right now and pivot to another student so that slot doesn't go unclaimed. And that's so great. having like one binder that I for a while there, it was kind of like glued to me and I wouldn't go anywhere with it. And then after Christmas, I just kind of was like, I feel like I have most of this memorized. Most of the teacher schedules memorized enough to know kind of where they are.
I love that. That's such a good, like proactive. Again, I'm always trying to think proactive and preventatively in terms of my school counseling program. And I love that tip. Because our time's so precious, we're often like scraping to see all the kids. So if someone does cancel, you don't want to have that lag time of like, okay, I have time to see someone. But by the time you pull up the schedules and whatever, 10 minutes out of your 20 minutes is gone. So I love that idea of having the schedules ready, just like having a backup plan in place. That's a really smart use of your time.
Yes. And people always knew when I was in the bathroom, though, because they knew that green binder would be like right outside the bathroom. If, Leslie's in the building, she's the binder's in workroom 1. She must be looking for a student.
That's awesome. So Leslie, what advice would you give to a new school counselor? Because this is your second year, correct?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
What advice would you give to someone who's just about to start their first job?
I guess my biggest advice would be to don't worry about doing it right, because doing it right kind of happens organically. And what is right, right? Your own style, your own way of doing things will organically evolve on its own. You just worry about being there for the kids. And so long as you're doing that, you are doing it right. There's no right or wrong way to do this.
I love that. That's really encouraging. Just be there for the kids. And then, yeah, I agree. Everyone definitely has their own style. That's why I love doing these interviews with counselors, because people do things that I had never thought of before. Or when I meet and talk with other counselors, I just always feel so inspired because people just have such good ideas. Like yesterday, you're one of our impact members. We had an impact meetup, and one of the people on the call was sharing about this book club idea that she's doing. And I had heard of people doing like a book club where the same group, will work through a book over like 6 to 8 weeks. But no, she wasn't doing that. She was reading like smaller picture books and having a meeting with those kids, like a one-time thing. It was just a really cool idea. And a lot of people on the call felt motivated. That's just one thing I love about our calls is I'm continually inspired by you guys.
That's awesome. Yeah, likewise. I enjoy listening to the podcast and, getting ideas. And, there's been plenty of ideas from the podcast that I have for sure, stolen.
Awesome. I love to hear that. Well, thank you so much for your time, Leslie, and for sharing your experience with us. I know the listeners are going to find it helpful.
Well, thank you for having me. I really appreciate the honor of being asked.
Thanks for listening to School Counseling Simplified. You can find the links from today's episode in the show notes. If you'd like to connect with Rachel, she's on Instagram and Teachers Pay Teachers at Bright Futures Counseling. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss any episodes of School Counseling Simplified. Talk to you next week.